This family is the Gasterosteidae. These are the sticklebacks. We only have one in Kentucky. Very cool looking fish. The one we have in Kentucky is the Brook Stickleback. And the other place where you're likely to run into these fish are at bait stores, because they tend to get into the ponds where they raise a lot of the bait minnows. A lot of the bait minnows you buy around here are raised up north because they need to be in cooler ponds. This is a fish that likes a family that tends to like colder water, or it's holoarctic, meaning it stretches over the poles, over into Europe on the other side of the poles. Anyway, they tend to be found in those cooler ponds where they raise bait minnows, and so a lot of times you'll be going through your bait bucket and you'll find one of these in there too. And hopefully it's not something that people, if you ever find one, don't release it, because it may or may not be the same species that we have here in Kentucky. But the one we have in Kentucky is the Brook Stickleback, and they're pretty easy to identify. They've got that very narrow caudal peduncle, and they've got both the spinous and the soft dorsal fins, but the spinous doesn't have membranes in between the spines. That's where you get the stickleback. It's just the spines. So that makes them pretty easy to recognize. When you see them swimming, you'll notice it too, that caudal peduncle, they hold it very stiff, and so they just vibrate the end of their tail really fast. They have kind of a unique swimming behavior, at least relative to other fish we have around here. So that's another one. You should be able to identify these. They're interesting, and they're used a lot in research because they have a very unique mating behavior, which has been well studied. This is something that at times has been called a reaction chain behavior, where you have one behavior or one trigger releases a behavior, and that acts as a trigger for the next behavior. And so you can get this sequence of behaviors, one triggering the next, and if one is not performed properly or fully, then the next one isn't performed, and so then the whole behavior stops. So for example, this starts when the males are ready to breed, and they get a red color on their head, a very bright red color, and that is a trigger to release aggressive behavior toward other males. And so this is when they're starting to spawn. This is how they defend their territories. If they see another male and they see that red, it makes them very aggressive, and they chase off the other male. But like with a lot of behaviors, they're not really seeing the red-headed male. They're just responding to that color red, and so anything red will be violently attacked by this male once they're in this mode. This was discovered by someone who had a bunch of these sitting by a window, and he noticed that any time a red fire truck went by, the males would go crazy. And so this is kind of where people started looking into these sticklebacks and studying their mating behavior a little bit more. Now the male, when they're setting up their territory and defending it against other males, they build a small nest. And this is not a nest like a sunfish will do, where they sweep an area clean, or like a trout red, where they'll sweep the gravel clean in a long line, or like a lot of minnows will do. They actually are building a little house. And so they get things and they build their little house, and they hold it together with a special secretion from their kidneys. It's kind of a glue that holds it together. And so then, once they have this house built, then they start looking for a female. If the female shows up and she's full of eggs, so she's got this round belly, that triggers the male to start dancing to try to attract her. And again, it's not that he's like, oh, it's not just a female that he's reacting to. It's just that sort of round shape that can release this behavior. And it's similar to other behaviors like we see in other animals. So for example, this kind of idea where it's keying on a particular shape instead of the actual object is well developed in birds sitting on their nest. And so if a bird is sitting on its nest and it sees something roundish next to the nest, it will grab that and pull it into the nest. And you can paint that any color and it'll still pull it in. And you could make it any size and it'll still pull it in. And sometimes, though, it's not even the roundness. Sometimes it is just the fact that it's sitting next to the nest. The point is that there are a lot of these behaviors that are sort of hardwired into the animal, and they're not necessarily looking at it the way humans look at it. They're not necessarily looking at it as, oh, this is an egg, I have to save it, or this is a female and I want to attract her to my nest. They can't help themselves. Just this one particular thing that they key upon releases this behavior. Another example is when you have like a nest parasite, like a cowbird that lays its eggs in another host nest, and then when they hatch, the birds are much bigger than their offspring, and they look very different. But the adults don't realize that, because the cowbirds open up their mouth and do that begging behavior, and that's all the parents sees and responds to. And whenever it sees that begging behavior, it feeds that baby bird. It doesn't see the whole picture. You see a lot of examples of this in animal behavior. So here's an example of the female doing the heads-up display to show that round belly, which triggers a behavior in the male, the zigzag dance, which he uses to lead the female to the nest. And then he shows her the nest, shows her how to get in, and if she's ready, she gets into the nest. And so he'll like point out the entrance. Well, a lot of times he'll actually go into the nest and come back out the other side to show her how to get in. And once she's in there, then the male will tremble and he'll keep pecking at the female, signaling her to release the eggs. That's her signal to release the eggs. Once she releases the eggs and she splits, the male comes in right after her, and then he releases milt and he fertilizes them. So it's this step-by-step behavior that's designed to end in fertilized eggs. And then once this happens, then the male guards the nest and guards the fry and gives them some parental care. And so that's what they're showing here. And because it's so well studied, there's lots of videos. I found a cool old school video showing these behaviors. I've put a link to it on the Canvas page, so check that out. And that's it for the sticklebacks. Thanks.